Tony, you got your RPG in my board game.
Well, Jesse, you got your board game in my RPG.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. Today we are having a conversation with +1 EXP. Tony, you are a diehard RPG.
I'm a diehard RPG. I am diehard the RPG.
You love the world of RPGs, from indie zines all the way to big, giant, ambitious campaign games. Your channel, lifestyle, and what you do is kind of designed to support and invest in this community. In the same way that Quackalope is a bit obsessed, some would say maybe overcommitted, to the world and art of board games. And I titled this video a very particular thing. The thumbnail says, "Why I Hate RPGs." And the title says, "Why I Love Board Games." Because I find in our community, there is this disconnect. There is this group of people that love this, play the heck out of this, can't get enough of this, that for some reason have an aversion to, a disdain for, a missed communication to the world of RPGs.
Right.
And on the same vein, I find there's RPG players, classic old school D&D guys, or the Zine Quest crowd that couldn't be bothered with. Don't want the rules to overload my play.
Right. And so there's a lot of times we'll see this conversation come up in communities, on social media, groups online, and in tables. At your game store, at your own table, most people are going to have a preference one way or the other. Though we'll see a lot of tables that do both. You're going to notice kind of what your players want, what they gravitate towards, and even the way that we use some of these terms can be very, very difficult and misleading.
And it's fascinating because I, as a creator and a gamer, came into the hobby through, honestly, Critical Role. Listening to that podcast made me want to go seek out an RPG group. Playing in an RPG game in a board game cafe made me want to go play a board game that felt like the RPG I just played. And then I went down this rabbit hole from Kingdom Death down to Catan, playing board games and discovering the world of mechanics and exploration and how those two things merge together. But the funny thing with my channel is, if I post about an RPG here, a lot of people ignore it. They don't think it's for them. They don't think it's targeted to them. They don't think they have the, it's in the realm of what they enjoy. But if I post a video with a thumbnail that says "Why I Hate RPGs," I bet there's a lot of people watching that have that same aversion, that are looking for reasons to despise this thing that's just the brother of our own hobby.
Right.
So that's this conversation.
And for me, the question is, we have to understand, we're all talking about tabletop play, right? Yeah. At the end of the day, we're all going to sit around a table with some of our friends. We're going to plunk a bunch of different cool things down in the middle, and we're going to have a good time for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. And that's what we have in common. And at the end of the day, that's what I want us all to know more than anything else is, we're all looking for that same social gathering experience. We're looking to have it in different ways. But even beyond that, some of the things that a lot of people think of as RPGs or as board games might not be as strictly one thing or the other as we think.
So to start this conversation, I want to set up a few premises that people might bring to the table if they're looking at RPGs and saying those aren't for me.
Right.
And then I want you to set up a few premises that people might bring to the table if they're looking at board games and saying, I'm an RPG player, I'm not interested in board games. So let me give you an example, and I want to hear your rebuttal to that, and then I want to go through some of the stuff you have here to feature that kind of bridge that gap or break down that narrative a little bit more. So to start with, the first argument that I think a lot of people are going to hear is, hey, I only have 1 or 2 people. I'm a solo gamer, or I have one friend that I play games with.
Right.
RPGs aren't for me.
Right, which is funny because there's a ton. There's a huge genre that's constantly growing of solo and 2-player RPGs that are constantly coming out. And the proliferation of RPGs is actually significantly faster than board games. So when we see a new design trend emerge, we typically see it grow and grow and grow. A few years ago, the concept of a solo RPG was something that was, hey, there may be a few here, they're mostly journaling games, and though there still are plenty of those, now there's tactical crawlers that are pen and paper RPGs. There's 2-player RPGs that are about these really bespoke kind of story experiences that you can create with just one other person. And there's even things that start to mimic and replicate going through and exploring maps, just like you might do in a dungeon crawler, like board game, that are fully RPGs and kind of an immersive, imaginative experience.
I hear what you're saying, Tony, but listen to me. I don't really like narrative so much. Like, I don't want this open form storytelling adventure. I don't want the DM to be able to control the outcome of the dice behind the screen. RPGs aren't for me. They're too focused on just the story.
Well, and I think, there's certainly something to be said for if you just like abstract games, that's fine. But most of us fall in love with the game for two reasons. One, the mechanics speak to us, and the other, the theme says something to us, and the theme is a type of narrative. And I would argue that it's way easier for me to have a conversation with a GM about what I'm looking for or not looking for in a story that we're telling than it is for me to look at a board game and say, I wish you were different in telling me a different type of story. That board game is far less likely to agree with you and change its mind than the GM at a table who's one of your good friends.
Hey, if you're running this, please don't fudge any dice rolls.
Any dice roll. Right.
Play flat and even.
Play straight
If I lose, I lose.
Right.
So I hear that as well. But I am not into classic fantasy. I mean, RPGs are equivalent to D&D in my mind, and I don't really like going back into medieval times and swinging big, heavy broadswords and fighting dragons till, my magic runs out.
Right.
It's not for me.
I've got great news because there are RPGs that cover any time period. So you've got Mothership, did $1 million on Kickstarter last year. It's been out in the Zero Edition for numerous years. It's got some of the best adventure modules. It's incredibly well supported. There's a huge community of play built up around it, and it's a aliens or space RPG that lets you kind of explore horror and panic and have your character run around and hopefully not die, which is again a challenge for a lot of people. You've got games like The Between, which is like Penny Dreadful Victorian horror monster hunters, but you might actually be the monsters. It's a little bit hard to tell sometimes. That's done by Gauntlet Publishing, right? We have Renegade Racers by Keegan EXE that we released that is about a Fast and Furious simulator, basically, where your two stats are fast and family. And you really want to look at how you do cool stunts and do epic things together as a team. So no matter what experience you're looking for in play, fantasy is actually a pretty small subsection of all the RPGs that come out.
The last and biggest argument, the one that I think will probably make you admit that RPGs are just not for board gamers. RPGs take a lot of time. I mean, I don't want to commit, I've seen YouTube videos that are like, we've been playing the same RPG campaign for 30 years. Mm-hmm. I want to sit down and play a Euro game. I want to solve a puzzle. I have a new group of friends that comes over. I oftentimes the one hosting. I don't have the time to run. I don't have the time to create. I don't have the time to do all the miniature painting, the design, the work that goes into doing D&D or doing an RPG.
Well, here's the great news. There are RPGs that you can play in as little as 5 to 15 minutes. You have things like Inhuman Conditions that are very RPG-centric that we'll got another video coming up about. You've got things, dungeons that you can run and sit down and play in an hour. Lumen Games by Spencer Campbell, which are video game power fantasy emulators, right? Most of those, you can do a whole session in 45 minutes to an hour and a half. As a matter of fact, a lot of RPG designers now are designing their games to be able to be played in that same hour and a half, 2.5 hour max time frame that a lot of other people are, and a lot of them are even shorter. For the Queen that I've got right here, this is a game you can actually tailor the length of depending on how long you want to play. It's GM-less. It takes no prep. You sit down, you're going to tell a story together about a queen that you all love and a journey you're going on until she gets attacked, and you decide if you're going to come to the defense. But you can play in as little as 30 minutes. And so there's a lot of games that are actually not that long, and they're not designed for ongoing campaign play.
So there's my arguments on board games versus RPGs. Do you have any rebuttals when it comes to what the RPG fandom looks at when they think of board games?
Yeah, and so it's really interesting hearing your story about coming in through RPGs, because for me, I came into the hobby through board games. I played board games from the time I was a young child. And awesome. Of course, things like Hi-Ho Cherry-O, Monopoly, but like Living Labyrinth, and then as I got older, Risk, Axis and Allies, other more intensive games were how I came up. I started playing Steve Jackson games. I was like, I'm going to learn how to play GURPS, their generic universal role-playing system. Okay. Worst title of a game ever. Steve and Phil, I love you guys, but we all know it. But it is one of my favorite games to this point. And I am an absolute GURPS stan and get a lot of ridicule in my own community for that. But I came in through board games, and so I absolutely love board games. But yeah, a lot of people who play RPGs get really frustrated by different things within the community. I will say sometimes it's just because of the perception and the way that RPGs are treated, or they're treated as kind of other than or separate. And I think that's okay. I think it's fine for people to say we like what we like, we don't. But I think for me, I think one of the big challenges are some of the reverse of what you talked about. Like, so I want to play a long campaign. I don't want to sit down and just play.
You want to play
for
a long
30
campaign?
minutes. I want to play for a few hours, and I want an ongoing story we can
Trust me,
explore.
there are massive, giant, involved worlds in the board game space that have miniatures and giant adventures and flavor text out the wazoo. Think of something like Madara, if you like a JRPG, that has literally a tome. You could read a few novels worth of story that you get control over an agency. If you like choose your own adventure, most of these games integrate some direction or some pathway, so it doesn't feel like you're on rails, which is an RPG thing that people hate. Instead, you actually get these narrative journeys that you go on, and it has replayability too, where you can re-adventure through and re-explore the system. I mean, one of the games I held up, Oathsworn here, one of the most popular games of this last year, is a giant homage to, a big boss battling dungeon adventure where you play heroes and you journey through the weird and the wild, and you get to go on this long, extended story. You can spend a whole year in a game like this, and it'll satisfy what you're looking for without a DM.
Awesome. Well, and I think one of the other things that we'll hear a lot of people say is like, hey, like I've got a group of friends I want to play with regularly. And look, the reality is, they like a lot of different experiences, but they don't want to learn a new set of rules over and over again.
It's fascinating, the perception that board games are just rules-centric. There's a lot of games out there that actually are rules-light but complexity-heavy. And what I mean is you can sit down, you can teach a game in about 3 to 5 minutes at the most, and then you could spend a couple hours digging into the nuance of what those rules are. And if they're looking for varied experiences, but not necessarily learning a new game every single season, there's many games, whether you're talking about a classic complex Euro where you learn it once, you can play it a dozen different ways as you sit down, all the way to something that's more narrative-driven, where it's like a dungeon crawl where you play various different scenarios, but it's the same framework or the same rule set that you're journeying through. So there are ways to either have quick and accessible rules or complex rules that reward you for knowing them by playing in a multitude of ways.
Yeah. Maybe, but one of the nice things about RPGs is, you don't actually need miniatures and all the gear. And so if you don't have to carry a big giant box with you, I can carry a deck of cards around with me. I can carry, just the book and a couple of dice with me, and then we can do a session of an RPG anywhere we go, and it's really easy to travel with.
This is going to be one of those things that might be more catered towards the type of game you want to play. I would say that some element of vocal storytelling has an advantage over board games, because I could sit on a subway and share a story with a fellow player. But if you're willing to experiment and maybe explore some genres of board games that you haven't really been introduced to before, there are a lot of games that are designed to travel with you. Button Shy, for instance, invents tiny little decks of cards that have every range from social deduction all the way to like story-driven to just pure mechanics that you can slide into the back pocket like a wallet and carry with you anywhere you go. Along with that, a lot of my favorite games don't actually take up a ton of table space, and they could still provide a heavy punch. You look at something like Gamelin Games that puts out the Tiny Epic series. Those are games that are in boxes about this size with a lot of depth to them, and some of them surprisingly still take up a whole table. So you can't do it on a train, but there's some flexibility there.
I think for me, the big thing that I think a lot of people get stuck with board games who really prefer RPGs is like, I want the flexibility to do what we want to do at a table, right? I want to go where we want to go. I want to do what we want to do. And when the rules try to limit me, I want us as a table to just be able to overcome that.
I kind of have two answers to that. One, it depends on the type of game you're playing. If you're playing something that's a little bit more open narrative, if you're playing something like a dungeon crawl, you can be the hero you want to be. The rules don't confine you any more than a DM or a rule book of a system that you're playing in would. It's just the perception of constraint. Yeah, sure, you might have maybe limited choices, or some of the narrative might be a little bit more controlled. You can't just ride a donkey off into the sunset. But if you're willing to give yourself permission to explore and experience the open world that you have when it comes to the assets the game gave you, there's a lot of flexibility. And when you look at games that are maybe heavier when it comes to a strategy that perceptionally don't seem like they have any flexibility at all. I'm talking like open-ended Euros. Mm-hmm. All information on the table. You're making critical, tactical decisions. Part of the fun of those games is playing and breaking the rules within the confines of the rule systems themselves. In the same way that you push back against a DM who's trying to keep you on a path or playing through a module and you like seeing where the flexibility is, some of your heavier Euro-style games still have gears or levers that you can twist and pull that make you feel really powerful and really satisfied to have found something within the realm of control that makes you feel like you broke it a little bit.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, I think it comes back to a lot of times what type of experience we're looking for at a table. And I think what both you and I have experienced, coming from different directions, ending up in different places, but actually loving both of these types of games, but spending very different times in different types of community, is they're not as far off as people think.
They're really not. I mean, I understand why communities build around each one in its own centric space, and I understand why there is not always as much crossover as maybe I would like to see. In my own life, I play board games right now, and I don't really play RPGs. Mm-hmm. It's because of the friends and the work and the circle that I have. But I'm always desiring to get that RPG group going.
I can always be
hiring
like,
a DM.
Jesse, here's a link to a cool RPG. Yeah. And you will go get it.
I will go buy it. We're going to do a video where I walk through all the stuff that I have purchased that I desire to play and I haven't been able to. And that's a frustrating part of the hobby. Really, the group that you're in or the friends that you're in and the thing that you're classically playing, it can be hard to talk people out of that space. And I think that's where the next part of this conversation goes, presenting some games that provide answers to, like, hey, I'm in the middle, or I'm interested in the middle. What is maybe those transitions? Where's the water sort of blur? We held up this a little bit earlier, which is the Root core book, the Root RPG game. And this system itself might not be the thing that solves the problem. Like, this is an RPG, true and first and foremost. But if you have a game group that loves Root,
right,
something like this that's an IP crossover is one of the ways that you can actually begin bridging that narrative. Let's sit down and play a game of Root, and the ending of that story sets up the next campaign we're going to play or the next one-shot we're going to do as a game group. There you have both living equally on the table.
Yeah, and you're already going to, with a thing like this, you're already going to know, hey, you're already familiar with this world, right? Yeah. You already know some of the stakes here. A PBTA, the system this is based on, Powered by the Apocalypse. It's a 2d6 system. It's really easy to pick up. And you might be looking and thinking, like, oh, that's a lot of book to read. Well, every single player only needs a few pages out of this book to know what they're all about. You don't have to learn this whole thing.
It's designed to facilitate a lot of freedom, but it's not a rule book in the sense that a board game rule book is.
It is, yeah.
You don't have to read it all.
And let's be honest, a lot of people aren't reading board game rule books anyway.
I get taught most of my board games as it is.
So. And it's the thing, like, I think a lot of people are like, and there's this thing about, like, rules authority, authorship, especially in RPG circles, that you don't see the exact same conversations in board game. In board games, it's usually understood the best way to learn a game is to have someone else teach you. Because RPGs can seem so rulebook centric because they are books, you oftentimes lose, like, the best way to play an RPG is for somebody to put a character sheet in front of you and say, what type of person you want to be, let's go on an adventure together, like, let's get started. And so, Wheels from Dicebreaker and I, we had a great hour-long conversation one time about some of the crossover in this. And I think we've got on the table just a few items, but things that really represent some of the scale of what you see. You've got all the way up to, like, full abstract narrative, what we call the Free Kriegenspiel movement, FKR is what it'll get tossed out as, which is literally the only form of that game is one person decides what happened when it's not clear to the group what it is. So there's basically literally a referee. There are no rules.
Yeah.
Everybody just describes what their character is doing, and every once in a while, if it's unclear what's going to happen, one person, a referee, goes, this happens, and then play just continues. There are literally no rules except for the consistency of the narrative you're creating. That's one end. At the other end, you have abstract strategy board games that are literally just moving pieces around, and they're almost sheer mechanics. But in the realm of that, like, a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition falls pretty squarely in the middle of those two things, especially if you're playing tactically, with miniatures, with terrain, with all those other pieces.
And I would say with the degree of rules that a Dungeons & Dragons has, this is not far off.
Right.
Dungeons & Dragons is giving you a constraint, a rules hierarchy you must follow. And if you're playing off of one of the modules, a narrative the DM wants you to follow. There's an agreement in the group when you sit down to play that you are going through this adventure. You're in this castle. You're not going out the front doors.
Right.
And so with something like Oathsworn, you have characters that have abilities and special cool things they can do. You have narrative choice that you can make that controls the story. You're all going kind of in the same direction, but there's flexibility in that. And you also have a pathway towards upgrading, a pathway towards gear, and a rule system around how you deal damage, how you receive hits, and what you can carry and bring with you.
Right. And here's the thing. you cannot role play while playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition tactically at all. You don't have to do voices. You don't have to say things.
And you
just
can
say,
still play
my
the game.
character does X, Y, Z, moves around, does a thing. With Oathsworn, you can do voices and you can talk between your characters and you can do all the role playing that you want to do and have just as much fun. And if you do that, if you do either one of those games are going to cross over on that intersection to one being heavier into role play just by the choices that you make at your table.
One of the reasons why I enjoy reading flavor text out loud around a game table, as opposed to listening to an app or something, or just reading it silent to each other, is because that's where, for me, we introduce voices and character and story as a collective game group, as an entity, as a board game group, that touches into that RPG world just enough that the board game's still fun. And I find if you just listen to an app, I lose connection. I lose that role-playing environment that people do enjoy operating in.
And I think the question is, what is it about whatever type of game you're looking at that you don't like? Because not every board game is the same. Not every RPG is the same. They're all designed to do different things, and we have to look at the intent that goes into that design and decide, does my table want to do that?
So let's talk about a few of the things we have spread out. We already touched on the Root RPG. I talked about Oathsworn a little bit. What are some of the stuff that you've brought to set down in front of the table for us?
Yeah, so I mentioned For the Queen earlier, but the reality is if I present this as a role-playing game, some people might balk at it. But if I present it as a storytelling game, where you're each a member of a queen's court, you're going to go through, you're going to look at some phenomenal art, you're going to pick out the card that represents your queen, you're going to decide the setting, and then there are just prompt cards in here. And every single round, you draw out a prompt card, and you decide, hey, do I want to answer this, or do I think somebody else at the table based on their character?
When did you know you'd never forgive the queen, and why?
Right. And the only conceit is we all love the queen, but we know that you now have something that means you haven't forgiven her. You answer that question, play proceeds to the next person. At a certain point, the queen will be attacked. You all describe if you come to her defense or not, and that's it. Like I said, plays in 30 minutes to 2 hours if you want to play a longer game. But that's, again, if I present this as a storytelling game, people will hop on it. If I present it as a role-playing game, people balk. This one I picked because it's bits, right? This could easily be...
This looks like a tabletop game.
This looks like a tabletop game.
Except for the DM screen, which I scooted off the side here.
Right, and even then, the DM screen, if we flip it around especially, it's got a beautiful art. This is by one of my favorite companies, Games Omnivorous. They make absolutely beautiful tabletop games. Really, Andre views what they do as making art pieces that just happen to be games,
That's fun.
And I love it. But this is a system agnostic, meaning you can play it with any RPG you want to. Adventure setting called The Bottled Sea. There's also one called Undying Sands. It's a desert. And you're just out traveling around this sea. As you move around, you have this thing of hexes in a bag, and you just draw them out randomly. And it might just be open ocean, and you roll a random encounter, or it might be an actual location, which are keyed over on this, and you're going to decide what you do, but resource management will come into play, right? Navigating around, discovery, a lot of the same things that you would look at as core mechanics, and a lot of exploration, resource management,
so
area
would you
control
merge
games.
this into a role-playing system where you're going, your group has decided to sail the 7 seas and set off, and you show up at the next session with this system, and you're like, I'm ready for your exploration to continue.
Ready for your exploration to continue. And here's the thing. You could stop at any one of these for an entire session, or you can make traveling around and growing your ship and crew and getting bigger and cooler ships that you could just plop down and say, this is the type of ship we have now. And that's going to let us get around and do more cool stuff. But depending on the system you put on top of this could become a very tactical resource management, survival on the high seas board game.
You could put on top of it, like you were saying, where you're flipping tiles and revealing, and it's like you said, a strategy, resource, survival game.
And there's mechanics for fishing, and this could become a fishing mini game for how you want to do it, because you could be doing it as a dex mechanic and flipping coins onto it to see what you pull up as you go, and everybody's going to do that, and then we're going to have to deal with the realities of whatever you pulled out of the sea today and see what happens next. So there's a lot of different things you can do with this that make it feel exactly like a board game.
I could even see a designer taking something like this that's built out and saying, hey, I want to add a few rules overheads to this, and it is now actually a board game and 100%. Not even an RPG anymore.
Not at all, yeah. And so there's a lot of great things that we're seeing like this like For the Queen, The Quiet Year. It's a communal map drawing game.
I have that one.
Yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal. And
I once listed that on solo games that I loved.
Yeah.
And realized that it on the box says 2 to 6
4
players.
Yeah.
And then realized that the reason why I had perceived it and played it as a solo game was because Shut Up and Sit Down had posted a video talking about it being just a really contemplative solo experience.
It is.
And I was like, that is 100% true.
It is.
You sit down and you just sketch and you draw and you build out this whole world in front of you.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of games, like I said, that engage in an entirely different thing. And if you look at systems like Dread, right, or systems that have grown out of it, like Rest in Pieces, which are all based around a Jenga tower and pulling blocks into that. And the core mechanic is that you're telling a horror story, but whenever there's a risk, you're going to pull a block out of a Jenga tower, and if the Jenga tower falls over, your character dies, and that's the end of that character. But at the end of the day, you're playing high-stakes narrative Jenga. And so there's a whole lot of different things that we see come in this realm, and then you can come down further. Like we've got these, which I love this series. We're gonna do a little bit more with this while I'm here. Don't have any of these. You have all of these.
I backed about a year or two ago the entire new reprint wave Kickstarter. There's actually some that I'm missing now. And I have enough of these that I need to go through them myself. But this is graphic novel adventures. This is a comic book version of what I grew up playing that I think instilled a love for storytelling and choose your own adventure. Those classic little flip, I don't know if it was like Ghostbusters or Goonies or what it was that had those books, but I remember sitting with a module where, I would start going down this pathway and I drowned at sea. The other, a spear hit me in the side. A shark came and attacked me. And I fell in love with the option of choosing the story that was being told.
Do you know there was one where you were trying to achieve utopia, and there was a utopia ending in the book, but there was no way to navigate to it in the Choose Your Own Adventure series?
Fun.
Yeah, so there was lots of really clever stuff baked into those. They also, and we were talking about this, you didn't know this beforehand, in the UK, there is a series called Fighting Fantasy that is an RPG book that literally you write down a couple of stats at the very beginning. You have an equipment list, you can pick a class, but it's literally 2 or 3 choices, very minimal things. And then you roll D6 as you go through, and it's a choose your own adventure, but if you roll, you keep track of your health, and if you run out of health, you die.
There's a fascinating 2-player system where you have a book and I have a book, and we're trying to catch each other and fight each other. It's like mage versus knight or something like that. And you open it up, and as I flip to pages and make the choices about what I pick up or what area I go down, suddenly your book is responding to the choices I've made. If I choose this path and we go down this, you then see me at the end of the hall and fire your ray at me.
And is this a role-playing game, or is this a book? Or is this a board game?
And in a way, I kind of see this as a solo book. A solo board game. The mechanics of this are closer to a board game in a way.
But
roles and stats and adventure.
And resource management.
But you're reading it as if it's a book.
And you're creating a character.
And you're creating a character as if it's an RPG. It's very, very it's very, very in the middle of this.
And so I think, again, we've got to say, okay, do I not like storytelling? Do I not want to have to speak in funny voices? Do I not want to be constrained by what the board tells me to do? I want a friend in the room to do it. Do I want to say, no, I don't want my friend to tell me what to do. I want us to all fight the board together.
And then this, for me, crosses over into something like Spire's End, which is a choose-your-own-adventure card-driven game.
And one day you'll open it.
One day I'll open it. Actually, probably this weekend I'll open it because we're going to play it together. I've been pining to play this for the longest time. I have a habit of I don't open games until I'm immediately ready to sit down and play them. It's a good process. I don't know if it is or not. Lots of people judge me for it, but
I have teenagers who used to be small children, and if you open that box before you're ready to play it, you're never going to have.
So that's my process. But this game here, and I did play the prototype in anticipation, but Graphic Novel Adventures is very much on the side of RPG book-like. But then you get something like this, which could be put into a comic book RPG game with some dice rolling on the side, but you've distilled it down to cards that you're actually journeying through and choices you're making in that sense, and it's now over here on the side of this is a board game. This is a solo puzzle adventure game. Well, the difference is just the format they're printed it in.
Right. And how much narrative space I'm going to give it in my head. Do I want to think through those things? or is it the meditative mechanical action? And again, like I know people who play RPGs who they're never going to talk in a voice. They're never even going to speak in first person. My character says this, I do that, they move over here, right? Like all that kind of stuff is going to happen, and they're just working the mechanics of the system. They're not actually doing explicit role playing. In the same way, you'll get games that they will say they're RPGs, but really it's the card mechanic side of things, and the role part is the progressive leveling up, and a lot of the elements that come more out of video games than out of the actual role playing part of role playing games. But again, all those are valid expressions of RPGs, of board games, and of tabletop culture as a whole.
Yeah. I don't know. I want more people to love the space we're in. I want more people to love both of these industries and play in both these industries. And honestly, I, as a channel and a creator and someone that comes from these hobby worlds, want more and more of an excuse to be able to get some of these different types of projects down to the table.
And I think, we're seeing more and more designers who are doing both. I mean, RPG designers. I don't know a single RPG designer who does not play a lot of board games also, because we're always looking for ideas from other places about what could we do, how
I
could we
know
do,
a lot of board game
look
designers that play no board games.
Right. I mean, like
I really do.
I think one of the biggest distinctions between RPG designers and board game designers is RPG designers play games, not their own, but other people's.
I know a ton of actual board game designers that play their board game.
Right. And I mean, and here's the thing. At the end of the day, we don't know where I'm going with that statement.
Tactical drink. At the end of the day, this was, in hopes, a conversation to bridge the gap a little bit. It was one of the things that we've been talking about as we've been doing collaborations, like what is right to go over on Plus One EXP? What is right to go over here on Quackalope? Where does the crossover happen? Where does the bridge actually connect? And why, when I post a video talking explicitly about a RPG game, does some percentage of my audience tune out? Why, if you post a video explicitly about a board game, does some percentage of your audience tune out? Why is there this perception that one of these hobbies is not the thing I'm in, when in reality, all of this is under the umbrella of tabletop games. All of this is the umbrella of getting around together with a group, with friends, and exploring something new. Whether that's mechanics, whether that's story, or some hybrid of the two.
Yeah, and I think the other big thing is, like, you and I both, we are picking things to share with our audiences that we're just genuinely excited about. Yeah. And at the end of the day, like, I would love, and I don't want to create any sense of parasociality, right? Like, Jesse and I are actually getting to hang out in person for the first time ever.
Super cool.
This weekend, like, I don't know the people in your audience, you don't know the people in my audience, but there is a level of trust that's built up with anybody who does reviews, who creates content. And if you subscribe to them, if you follow their channel, if you follow their work, there's something that you have latched onto about what they like that you've realized you also like. And so giving them the time and the space to share with you what that love is, I think is good. So if you've been with this in the video this far, if you haven't already navigated away or something else like that, I really appreciate you listening to Jesse, letting me share this space with him, and thinking about what is it about an RPG you might like? Is there themes in board games that you get really excited about? Is there an RPG that might match those themes? Is there a mechanic in a board game that you get really excited about? Same thing for RPGs. Is there a central type of dice roll or resource management or element of an RPG that you're like, I love that mechanical part. It makes me super excited every time I do it and I get to crunch in on that. Well, what's a board game that does that well, that tells a great story also too? We want to be better about curating those things for people and sharing them out, and being able to not just say, hey, it's board games versus RPG, but here are things that we love as creators, and we just want to share them with you.
It's funny because I have a lot of people that became attached to the channel because I insisted on doing things like reading flavor text and going through the story and exploring the narrative. And I'm like, you're an RPG. Like, you are. Like, if that's what if you love someone pausing on camera to say this paragraph matters,
right?
Like, you're an RPG and a board gamer. Like, you're both, but you're under that umbrella, and it's fun to be able to talk and share those. Also, one caveat, just so you're aware of what my audience is, the vast majority of the 47,000 subscribers we have subscribed mostly off of duck butt pictures. I just want to let you know that.
You know what they're into. You know what they come for.
They come for duck butt pictures.
They come for duck butt.
So, tail's cute, man. Just saying.
Everybody comes to my channel for the beard. That's it. That's what they come for.
That's why I need to regrow mine. That's why I'm trying to. I actually, in anticipation of you coming, stop shaving.
You're like, I can't let Tony shave me.
You
when
were
he gets
so
here.
disappointed in me when the big thick beard was removed.
Literally, like I was like, what happened? You
Yes.
watch the whole video. It's like, I don't care what happened.
I can't do it. So we're gonna. I'm making a commitment, despite Shira's sincere objections, to re-girthing myself with a nice beard for at least the next season.
There we go.
And then seeing where we go from there.
Seeing
where we go. Yeah, but it's all I have left. My hair's not lasting. So
I wear a hat for
thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. So do I.
Different reason.
Very close as well.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time. There's some ending. Oh yeah, there is an ending here. Whatever the case, whatever you do, remember to do the important thing.
Play more bird games.
Play more bird games. We'll see you next time. Bye. I saw your face go, oh, he's gonna do it.